So what does it mean to focus? Not in photography, just in general in the world. What does it mean to focus? To pay attention, to take our focus away from X and to put our focus into Y. Okay? That means that focusing is drawing attention to something particular and drawing our attention away from something else. So how do we do that in photography? Let's just look at this image here first. This is a picture of the groom being blessed by the rabbi and his father in the background looking on. Okay? What's this a picture of?
Mother.
This is a picture of the mother looking at her daughter and her husband, yeah? What's the difference? How comes this is a picture of the groom being looked at by his father, and this is a picture of the mother looking at the bride? What determined the subject?
Focus.
The focus. What's focus? Focus is the sharpness of an image. So in this image, the boy is sharp, and the father's blurry looking on the background. So he becomes secondary, and the boy becomes primary. In this image, the mother is sharp, and the bride is blurry, which means the mother becomes primary, and the bride becomes secondary. So let's look at a few examples of this. This is a picture of the mother looking at her son under the wedding canopy, and this is a picture of the son being looked at by the mother. This is a picture of the groom, picture of the bride. This is a picture of the bar mitzvah boy looking at his grandpa, and a picture of the grandpa looking at the bar mitzvah boy. This is a picture of the boy wearing tefillin, and this is a picture of the tefillin being worn by the boy. The picture of grandma sitting by the wedding canopy, and a picture of the wedding canopy with the grandma in the foreground. Okay, so how do we determine, as a photographer, how do we make our camera, so to speak, focus or pay attention to one thing, make something sharp, and make something not sharp, make something blurry? How does that work? So one word, the key word to understanding focus in photography is distance. Okay? Our cameras, they're not like telephones where the telephones are aware of different stuff going on. The cameras are not aware of what's going on, generally. The cameras are able to concentrate, so to speak, on a distance, to lock on a distance. So how do we focus our cameras? Now, we're going to press this button up here on the Canon. We have this like crosshair made of little rectangles. Default setting on our camera is going to be using all focus points. When we look in the camera, we'll see a view similar to this. Okay? This circle, depending on the camera, but nowadays we'll have generally, say, 9 squares. On the more expensive cameras we have more squares, and we only see certain ones at a certain time. But the point is, we have this concept of these focus points. These squares are called focus points. These points are what your camera is going to use to focus. Okay? Now, when we get our camera, the default selection is that all of these points are going to be lit, and the camera is going to decide what it thinks is the most important part of the image. We want to get away from that. We want to have as much control as possible, which means taking control away from the camera. The first thing we're going to do is go from using all of the points. We could potentially select any of these 9 points, or all of them. We want to choose our center point. Okay, once we've selected our center point, now we have to remember that this button, the shutter button, is actually 3 buttons rolled into one. Number 1, obviously, takes the picture. Number 2, when the camera goes to sleep, if you leave the camera for a few moments, you'll see the screen will turn off and so on and so forth. If you just touch this button, it will wake the camera back up. That's a kind of side point. And number 3, and very importantly, is that this button allows the camera to focus. Now you hear that beep? That beep is the camera saying to me, yes, I've got focus. Now when we look through the camera, we'll see the middle point is lit up. When I put the middle point onto any object, it's that distance that is going to become in focus. Again, what is focus? Distance. Focus is distance. Okay, our camera is going to work at a distance. That distance is going to be in focus. Anything that's closer or anything that's farther is going to be out of focus. Let's look, for example, this picture here. This is of a wedding contract. Now I focused over here, whatever distance that is for my camera. Let's say it's a meter. Yeah? Now, this line, we can see there's a line of focus. Now, what do you think is the distance from over here to my camera? If this is where I focused on a meter, how far would this be from my camera?
The same distance.
The same distance, also a meter. And also here, anything further or anything closer is going to be out of focus. So now, we created a scenario. This was the scenario we created. I put the camera down on the table, okay, and here's a ruler that will show you how close the batteries are. I stood up all these batteries, okay, and we had at different distances from the camera. Okay, I focused on battery number 1, okay. What's the other battery that's the same distance from my camera? Battery number 7, okay. So I created this demonstration to show you that battery number 1 and number 7 are the same distance from the camera. Battery number 3 and number 5 are the furthest from the camera. And battery number 4 and 2 and 6 are the same distance, 1 back, 1 forward, 2 forward. This is what the picture looks like from the camera. So we saw that battery number 1 and 7, I'm focused on battery number 1, and number 7 was the same distance.
You have to do the distance on the camera?
So I worked out the distance of the camera by holding the shutter halfway down, like I showed you before. Yeah. When you hold the shutter halfway down, that will lock the distance. Then I took the picture. I locked on this distance, number 1. You can see that number 7 that was the same place is also sharp. Now, from looking at this image here, which batteries do you think are the furthest from number 1?
5 and 3.
5 and 3, why?
For the most blurry.
Sorry?
For the most blurry?
Because they're blurrier. So let's look at the picture here. 5 and 3 are the furthest from number 1. Where 2, 4, 6 are closer, 2, 4, and 6 are closer, which means they're going to be less blurry. Clear? So to focus our camera, right now I'm going to focus on this pen in front of me. That means that I hold the trigger finger halfway down. You hear the beep? That beep is my camera telling me now that my camera has worked out the distance between me and the pen and it's locked on that distance. I take the picture.
Towards the pen.
I've now put the square that we saw, remember we saw those squares? I've put the middle square on the pen. Okay? Now watch what happens. I'm going to now do something a little interesting just to demonstrate the point. Now I'm going to open up my ruler to 1 meter. Let's just move this pen a little bit further away. Thank you, that's great. Okay, now I'm going to focus I'm going to now focus my camera on the pen, and I've locked it on this distance. I'm now going to turn to manual focus, okay, which now means that my camera locked on that distance, and that's what it's locked on. Now, if I take a picture from this place where we went before, and I look at the pen here, you'll see the pen is sharp in focus. Now, what's going to happen if I take a picture now of Michal and I move further back? What's this picture going to look like?
Well, she's going to be blurred.
Blurry. And as I move closer to you until I get to the distance from where the pen was, you'll see you'll start getting sharper and sharper. Now watch, this is the distance, we worked it out already, which means that I can just move over to here. I'll put the tape measure over here. I'll take a picture, and wherever the tape measure is will be sharp to the point that I can actually just put the tape measure into the air, take a picture, and you can see that the tape measure is sharp and everything around that area is not sharp. Clear? That is focus. Now, what problem would that pose if we were taking pictures of people? How would that cause me an issue?
Only one person would be clear.
Every time they move.
If they move, that would cause a problem. Let me just say, let's say Sally is standing, I'll take a picture of Sally, and her friend Roberta comes from behind and gives her a hug from behind. Now, Sally's face is here, and Roberta's face ends up behind her over here. According to what we've just learned, that's going to be a big problem. Okay, so what's the way that we can fix that immediately, very quickly? A very simple, easy way of fixing that
closer.
is just have Roberta lean forward so she's in the same place. Remember, focus is distance. Okay? When something's closer, when something's farther, it's going to be out of focus according to the distance that our camera locked on. Okay, so now something very important to remember is everything that we've just learned. What was the rule, what was the most fundamental rule of composition that we learned? Remember, we spoke about it?
Shapes, the geometric.
Geometric underlying shape. But what did we learn in regards to the grid? The rule of thirds. Okay, so now what would happen if I want to put my subject on the third? So according right now, if I want to put my pen on the third, make sure my camera's on autofocus. Right now I've put my pen on the third, and I take my picture, and we can see that the pen is thoroughly out of focus. Why? Because my focus point was over here, which is much further away. So now what I would need to do is focus on the pen, recompose, and then take my picture. The focus locks. That's what this button does. So by holding the shutter halfway down, recomposing my frame, and then taking the picture, that will allow me to put my subject on the third of the frame. Clear? Okay? 3 very important rules to remember when dealing with focus. This is very, very important to remember. Is that our cameras need certain criteria to be able to focus. Number 1, if you're too close to something, this varies on different lenses. This lens can get to within 45 centimeters, whereas this lens can only get to within 85 centimeters. So with the pen right now, I can focus from here, okay? What about if I go closer? Can you see? I'm pressing the button, nothing's happening, okay? It has a minimum focusing distance. That's 85 centimeters, and it's so sensitive that even that much closer, it will not focus, okay? So you have a minimum focusing distance on every lens. This is 85 centimeters. Another thing that's going to stop you from focusing is when there are no lines. So for example, this table here, which is smooth without any lines, you hear? Again, my camera will not focus, okay? And another problem is if it's too dark. It's the same idea of if there's no lines. Okay, because it's dark, it won't be able to see the lines. So there's 3 potential issues with focus that can drive you crazy if you're not aware of them. Number 1 is being too close. Number 2 is that there are no lines. And number 3 is that it's too dark. Class 2, Chapter 2, Focus. To focus on something means to pay attention to X and to not be paying attention to Y. In photography, focus is sharpness based on distance. We make X sharp, we make Y blurry. That means we're focused on X and not on Y. The distance, our camera will focus on a distance. It's not aware of things and people, objects, etc. We lock on a distance, and anything closer than that distance or farther from that distance will not be sharp. We focus using the shutter button, holding the shutter halfway down. That will allow us to lock our focus and recompose our frame. The 3 conditions to focusing are that we can't be too close. That depends on the lens. There needs to be some kind of textures, which means, or lines, which means it won't focus, the camera won't focus on something smooth, and it can't be too dark.